Have you ever found yourself unable to let go of someone who hurt you the most? This is the story of a beautiful woman who found herself trapped in a relationship that promised everything but gave nothing but pain. Today, I want to share her story, a story of heartbreak, struggle, and eventually, the strength to move on. She met someone who seemed perfect, the kind of person everyone wants. At first, it felt like a dream. There was laughter, shared memories, and a connection that felt unbreakable. But over time, the cracks started to show, and she began to realize that things weren't as they seemed. The words he spoke no longer held the same meaning, and the actions that followed began to feel more like manipulation than love. For so long, she ignored the signs. She wanted to believe in the love she had with him, holding on to the good moments. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but the emotional toll was undeniable. She was stuck, confused, and questioning everything she thought she knew about love. This isn't just about loss. It's about finding the strength to let go when the relationship is draining you. It's about realizing that you deserve more, that you deserve respect, love, and kindness. As you listen, I hope you see yourself in her story, and maybe even find the courage to make the changes you need in your own life. If this story resonates with you, I ask that you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll help others find the strength and hope they may need in their own lives. Thank you for being here. It all started on a rainy afternoon at a coffee shop, where she was just trying to get a quiet cup of coffee before heading home. She didn't expect to meet anyone that day, but then he walked in. There was something about him, the way he smiled, the way he carried himself, and the way his eyes seemed to light up when he saw her. It wasn't like anything she had experienced before. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, like they'd known each other for years, even though it had only been a few minutes. They laughed over small jokes, shared stories about their favorite books, and before she knew it, she was already looking forward to their next meeting. Everything about him seemed perfect. In those first moments, he seemed like the guy she had been waiting for. He listened intently, made her feel special, and gave her all the attention she didn't know she needed. He was charming, confident, and made her feel seen in a way that she had never felt before. His words, his touch, even his gestures seemed like they were part of something that was meant to be. It felt easy, natural, almost too good to be true. As the days passed, their connection only seemed to grow stronger. There was no shortage of romantic gestures, late-night conversations, surprise dates, and endless texts filled with sweet words. She could hardly believe how much she was falling for him. Every day felt like a new adventure. He remembered the little things, the way she liked her coffee, the book she had mentioned wanting to read. It felt like he was the person she had been waiting for her whole life. When they were together, everything else faded away. He made her feel alive, seen, and appreciated. In her mind, it was as though everything in her life had led to this moment, to this person. At first, there were no doubts. No insecurities. He was perfect in every way, and so was their relationship. She began imagining a future with him, even without realizing how fast things were moving. It wasn't just the romantic moments, either. It was the way they could talk for hours about anything and everything. The way his presence made everything feel right, even on the toughest days. Everything felt effortless, and for a while, it seemed like they were meant to be. But even in those perfect moments, there were small things she started to notice, things she tried to ignore. It began with little comments here and there, things that didn't seem harmful at first, but later, she would realize were part of a pattern. He started suggesting things about her appearance, saying things like, "You'd look even better if you just changed your hairstyle a little," or, "I wish you could be more like someone else." At first, she brushed it off, thinking maybe he just had a different taste in things. But the more he made those comments, the more she started to feel a little less comfortable in her own skin. Then there was the way he wanted to control where she went and who she spent time with. It started with small questions, like, "Who were you out with last night?" or, "Why didn't you text me back sooner?" It didn't feel like concern, but rather something more possessive. She thought, maybe he just cares too much, but those small requests turned into something more, asking her to spend less time with friends, even though they had been part of her life long before he came along. Slowly, without realizing it, the relationship started to shift. It didn't feel as free or light-hearted as it used to. She was starting to lose a sense of herself, but she didn't want to admit it. After all, everything else seemed so perfect. As time passed, the perfect picture she had of the relationship started to crack. At first, it was subtle. He would call her out for being too friendly with others, questioning her interactions with friends, even accusing her of things that were completely unfounded. The comments about her appearance grew more frequent, and they became more critical. "Why don't you look like you used to when we first met?" he'd say. "You're not trying hard enough anymore." She started to feel trapped in his world, like she couldn't be herself anymore. He became more controlling, more demanding. It wasn't about love anymore, it was about control. There was a constant pressure to prove herself, to justify her actions, and she began to feel like she was walking on eggshells, constantly worried about what he would say or do next. The manipulation took root, and slowly, her every decision began to feel like it had to be approved by him first. But the worst part was the gaslighting. There were times when she would bring up something that had hurt her, something he had done, only for him to twist the situation and make her feel like she was the problem. "You're overreacting," he would say. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? You're just being too sensitive." He made her doubt her own thoughts and feelings, leaving her questioning her reality. The love she thought was pure and true had morphed into something toxic, something that felt suffocating and manipulative. The emotional toll of the relationship became unbearable. She started to lose sight of who she was. The constant criticisms chipped away at her self-esteem, and the emotional manipulation made her feel like she was never good enough. What used to feel like a partnership now felt like an endless cycle of pleasing him, keeping him happy, and constantly questioning herself. Her confidence, once so strong, began to erode. She felt less like herself every day. The joy she once had in spending time with friends, pursuing her passions, or even just relaxing on her own disappeared. She felt like she was always walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing or do something that might trigger him. He convinced her that she wasn't capable of making good decisions, that she couldn't trust herself. Slowly, she started to believe him. The worst part was the isolation. His constant need for control, his demands on her time, and his subtle manipulations made her pull away from her friends and family. She didn't even realize it was happening. She started to doubt the people who loved her and found herself spending more time with him, even when she knew it wasn't healthy. Her world was shrinking, and she didn't know how to stop it. Despite all of this, she wasn't ready to give up. She still believed that love could fix it. She tried to work things out, tried to understand why he was acting this way. Maybe it was her fault, she thought. Maybe if she tried harder, did more for him, everything would go back to normal. So, she apologized over and over, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. She tried to be what he wanted her to be, thinking that if she was perfect, things would improve. She suggested couples therapy, but he dismissed the idea, telling her it wasn't necessary. He was convinced everything was fine, it was her that was the problem. She poured herself into the relationship, doing everything she could to make him happy, but the more she gave, the more he took. There was no appreciation, no acknowledgement of her efforts. She was putting in all the work, but he wasn't meeting her halfway. There was no balance, no fairness. It felt like she was pouring herself into a well that would never be filled. The harder she tried, the more exhausted she became. Nothing she did seemed to change the dynamic. She started to realize that no matter how hard she tried, the relationship would never be what she wanted it to be. She couldn't fix it alone. But by then, she had already invested so much emotional energy into it that it felt impossible to walk away. She was stuck in a cycle of hope and disappointment. It was at her parents' house when everything came to a head. She had invited him over for dinner, hoping it would be a chance for them to connect in a calmer, more comfortable environment. Her parents were kind, welcoming, and loved him, at least, that's what she thought. But halfway through the meal, something shifted. He had been distant all evening, barely engaging with anyone, and then came the comment that would change everything. He casually made a remark about her father's job, belittling it in front of her parents. He laughed it off like it was a joke, but she saw the hurt in her father's eyes. Her heart sank as she watched the tension build. Her mother awkwardly tried to steer the conversation away, but it was clear that her partner didn't care. He was indifferent to how his words affected her family. The facade of respect that she had built up for him cracked in an instant. Later, as they were leaving, he brushed it off. "Your family is too sensitive," he said. "They should learn to laugh at themselves." She had never felt more embarrassed. But she couldn't show it. She tried to laugh, tried to explain it away, but the damage was done. She realized, in that moment, that he didn't respect her, her family, or the boundaries she had tried to set. That was the first time she truly understood how far the relationship had fallen. It wasn't just her feelings that were being disregarded, it was her entire world. The second blow came a few days later when she was with her best friend. They had been through everything together, and her friend had always been a shoulder to cry on. But that day, when she tried to open up about her struggles, her partner had called her friend too dramatic and a bad influence. He didn't want her to talk to anyone about their relationship, it was as if he wanted to keep her isolated. That was when her best friend, who had been patient for so long, finally spoke up. "You deserve better," she said. "This isn't love. This is control." Her best friend's words echoed in her mind. It was the wake-up call she needed, and for the first time, she realized the toxic grip he had on her. That moment was the breaking point. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She couldn't continue to let him dictate her world, make her feel small, and take her for granted. It was time to make the hardest decision of her life, to let go. Walking away wasn't easy. The moment she ended things, the guilt hit her like a ton of bricks. She had spent so much time trying to make it work, trying to believe that things could get better. Walking away felt like a failure. She wondered if she had given up too soon, if she could have done more to fix it. The heartbreak was unbearable. For days, she cried. The memories of the good times, the laughter, the connection, felt like a distant dream. She kept replaying those moments in her mind, wondering what went wrong. But deep down, she knew it was the right choice. The guilt didn't last forever, but it lingered. She felt like she had abandoned him, even though he was the one who had abandoned her emotional needs long ago. It was confusing. She wanted to feel liberated, but the emotional weight was heavy. The hurt still clung to her heart, and the sadness was overwhelming. Every time she tried to move forward, there was a part of her that still wanted him back, despite everything he had done. It was like a tug-of-war in her heart, the love she had for him and the pain he caused her, both battling for her attention. But slowly, as the days went on, she began to realize that the relationship wasn't real love. It was manipulation. It was control. It was toxic. That realization gave her strength. She knew now that her heart deserved better. She had to remind herself every day that she was worthy of love that didn't hurt, that didn't leave her questioning herself, and that didn't isolate her from those who cared. Even after everything, even after all the hurt and the realization that leaving was the only way forward, she still couldn't let go. She kept looking at his social media, wondering if he was moving on. She checked her phone, hoping for a message, even though she knew deep down that it would only make things worse. She still missed him, and that confused her. Why was it so hard to break free when she knew he was the one who had hurt her? Her mind was a battlefield. There were days when the longing for him felt unbearable. She thought about all the good times and tried to convince herself that maybe they could be happy again. She missed the companionship, the feeling of being wanted, even if it was toxic. But every time she thought about going back, she remembered the hurt she had let go of, the emotional toll it took on her. She remembered her best friend's words, and she knew, deep down, that she couldn't go back to a relationship that had only broken her. She had to let go. And so, she did. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy. But slowly, over time, the need to contact him faded. The longing to go back began to feel less important. She began to remember her worth, and in doing so, she started healing. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was the beginning of something much better: self-love, self-worth, and the promise that she would never allow someone to make her feel small again. Even though she had made the decision to end things, the hardest part was not letting go of the memories. Those happy moments kept replaying in her mind, and it was hard not to feel that pull back toward him. The first time she remembered it was on her birthday, a day she had been so excited for, but it ended up bringing back so many conflicting emotions. They had spent the previous year celebrating it together in such a beautiful way. That day had been filled with laughter, thoughtful gifts, and long, heartfelt conversations. It was one of the few days where everything felt right. She remembered the way he looked at her that day, the way he made her feel special, and for a moment, she found herself missing him again. The warmth of that memory made her wonder if she had made the wrong decision. She found herself revisiting old photos, going through their text messages, and even checking his social media, hoping to find some sign that he was missing her too. Every post he made felt like a message, every comment, every like, made her question if he was truly over her. There were nights when she convinced herself that they could be happy again, that maybe he had changed, that maybe she had been too quick to judge. It was as if the distance between them was still filled with an empty longing that hadn't quite been filled with anything else. But each time she looked back, reality hit hard. She knew the person she had fallen in love with wasn't the same as the person who had hurt her. Yet, the thoughts of reconciliation kept creeping into her mind, dragging her back to that space of doubt and confusion. Luckily, she wasn't alone in this fight. Her friends and family were her lifeline during this difficult time. They had seen her at her lowest, but they never judged her. They were there to remind her of who she was, of the person she was before she met him. Her best friend was her constant source of comfort. Whenever the temptation to reach out to him arose, her friend would gently pull her back to reality. "You've already made the hardest decision," her friend would say. "You don't need him to feel whole. You are enough." Her family, too, had been there for her, offering unconditional support. They knew how much she had given to the relationship, how much she had invested, and how broken she had been when it ended. But they also knew that this was for the best. They encouraged her to take time for herself, to focus on her well-being, and to lean into the love and support around her. And for the first time in months, she began to feel that warmth again. She began to remember who she was outside of the relationship. She rediscovered parts of herself that had been lost in the chaos, and with each day, she became a little stronger. Therapy also played a big role in her recovery. It wasn't easy to admit that she had been manipulated, that her emotions had been used against her. But with the help of a therapist, she started to see things more clearly. She learned to recognize the signs of toxic behavior and understand why she had allowed it for so long. Therapy gave her the tools to heal, to set boundaries, and most importantly, to reclaim her sense of self-worth. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was the first step toward her healing. Slowly, with the support of her loved ones, she started to rebuild. They helped her stay focused, reminded her of her strength, and encouraged her to trust that there was more to life than the person who had hurt her. They helped her navigate the toughest part of all, letting go and believing in the possibility of something better. As the days passed, she started to have moments of clarity, moments where everything she had been questioning started to make sense. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, she began to see things for what they really were. She realized that the love she had with him wasn't pure, it was one-sided and manipulative. She had spent so much time trying to meet his expectations, to make him happy, that she had lost sight of her own needs, her own worth. One particular moment stood out to her. She was sitting in her room one afternoon, sorting through old photos, and she stopped at one where they were both laughing. For a brief second, she remembered how happy she thought she was, but then it hit her, that happiness had been fleeting. It wasn't real. It was a facade built on lies, jealousy, and control. She realized that in those moments, she had never truly felt valued. The love she had experienced was conditional, based on her compliance and willingness to lose herself in the relationship. That was the breakthrough she needed. She began to understand that it wasn't her fault, she had simply been caught in the illusion of love, trying to hold on to something that wasn't healthy. The clarity was painful but liberating. It was the first time in a long while that she could see the truth that she had the right to love herself first. Rebuilding her confidence took time. She worked on accepting that she wasn't defined by the relationship. She started doing things she loved again, like painting, going for long walks, and reading. The more she engaged in activities that made her feel good about herself, the stronger she became. Each small step, each new habit, helped her remember who she was, the woman who had once been vibrant, confident, and full of dreams. And with each day, she began to feel more like herself again. As she continued to work on herself, something remarkable happened. She began to feel a sense of independence that she hadn't known in a long time. She had always been so focused on the relationship, on trying to make things work, that she had forgotten how powerful it was to stand on her own. But now, as she embraced her new reality, she realized she was not just surviving, she was thriving. For the first time in months, she felt free. Free from the emotional manipulation, free from the constant questioning of her worth. She rediscovered her passions, her goals, and most importantly, her confidence. She was no longer bound by the expectations of someone else, and that was the most liberating feeling she had ever experienced. She could make decisions for herself without fear of criticism or rejection. She could walk into a room and feel proud of who she was, without needing anyone's approval. Her independence became a source of strength. She found the courage to set new goals for herself, personal, professional, and emotional. The woman she had once been was still there, but now she was more aware of her value, more protective of her heart. She learned that she didn't need a relationship to define her happiness. She could find joy within herself, and that was the greatest gift she could give herself. The more she embraced her independence, the more she realized that being alone didn't mean being lonely. She had everything she needed within her, the love, the strength, and the resilience to keep moving forward. And that realization was the final step in her healing process. She was free to build a future that was entirely hers. As she looked back on everything that had happened, the lessons were clear, lessons that, at one point, she never would have imagined would be so important to her healing. The first lesson was about self-love. For so long, she had defined her worth based on someone else's approval, constantly trying to meet his needs while neglecting her own. But now, she knew that her worth didn't depend on anyone else. It was inherent, something that came from within. She didn't need to change who she was or sacrifice herself to make someone else happy. She learned that the most important relationship she would ever have is the one with herself. Another lesson she learned was about recognizing red flags early. Looking back, she could see the signs, the manipulation, the subtle controlling behaviors, the emotional neglect. At the time, she had tried to convince herself that it was just a phase or that it would get better. But now, with the clarity she had gained, she understood that those behaviors were never going to change. And more importantly, she now understood that it was her responsibility to set boundaries and walk away when those red flags appeared. She didn't have to stay in a relationship that wasn't right for her. She had the power to protect herself. The final lesson she learned was about valuing personal boundaries. She had spent so long ignoring her own needs, letting others dictate how she felt, how she acted, and what she deserved. She realized that boundaries weren't walls, but healthy lines that protected her emotional well-being. By learning to say no when needed, she started to reclaim control over her life, her heart, and her future. It wasn't always easy, but she learned that boundaries were not just for others, they were for her own protection and growth. To anyone watching this, struggling with a toxic relationship or uncertain about their next step, I want you to know this: you are not alone. You are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And it doesn't matter where you are right now, what matters is that you take the first step toward healing. Healing is not a quick fix. It's not a destination that you can reach overnight. It's a process, one that takes time, patience, and a lot of self-compassion. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you don't deserve to be treated well. You don't have to stay in situations that hurt you. You don't have to keep going back to someone who doesn't value you. The most important thing you can do for yourself is to prioritize your well-being, your happiness, and your future. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to take time to heal. And it's okay to choose yourself, because you are worth it. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. There are people out there who will support you, who will lift you up, and who will remind you that you are capable of so much more than you may believe right now. Trust the process. Believe in yourself. And most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. She started in a place where she couldn't see beyond the relationship, unable to understand why things were the way they were. She had been blinded by love, confused by manipulation, and trapped in a cycle of emotional pain. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, she began to find her way back to herself. She remembered who she was before all of this, the strong, independent woman who had dreams and goals beyond the relationship. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when she second-guessed herself, when the old habits tried to pull her back. But each time she resisted, each time she reminded herself that she was worth more, she grew stronger. Slowly but surely, the walls of confusion started to come down, and she began to see clearly. She started to heal, to reclaim her confidence, and, most importantly, to recognize her own worth. Today, she's in a better place. Not because it was easy, but because she made the choice to break free from a toxic relationship. She chose herself. She chose healing. And through it all, she learned that she is enough, exactly as she is, without anyone else's validation, without anyone else's approval. I want you to know that if you're watching this, you're not alone. The road to healing may be difficult, but it's also filled with powerful moments of self-discovery and growth. Every step you take toward healing is a victory, and it's a victory you deserve. Take a moment to reflect on your own relationships, and ask yourself, am I truly happy? Am I being treated with the love, respect, and kindness that I deserve? If the answer is no, then it's okay to step away. You don't have to stay in a place that drains you. You don't have to settle for less. You have the power to create a life that reflects your worth. It's never too late to make the changes you need. You are capable of healing. You are capable of growth. You are worthy of love, and the love you deserve starts with loving yourself first. Don't be afraid to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever found yourself in a toxic relationship? How did you overcome the struggles that came with it? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the encouragement someone else needs. If this video resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who might be going through the same struggles. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. This community is here to support each other, and together, we can create a space where we all feel empowered to heal, grow, and love ourselves fully. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. You are stronger than you think, and your journey, however long it may take, is one worth taking. I believe in you, and I know you'll get through this, just like she did.